So there's so much going on in robotics investing. I mean, it's still sort of a drop in the ocean compared with what VCs are funding elsewhere, but there is a huge uptick in deals, and the deal sizes are getting larger. According to Crunchbase, I think around 40 companies raised $520 million in the first quarter of this year. And that's the same amount that VCs plugged into 134 companies in all of 2014. So it's a big difference. We're going to be talking with these three guys today about what they are investing in right now and what they're sort of excited about on the horizon. And we're also going to try to get a little advice from them for those of you in the audience who might be looking to possibly pitch them. So, Josh, let's start with you. All of your firms are sort of a little bit different from mainstream firms, and I thought you could sort of help us understand exactly in what ways that's the case.
So in our case, we're managing $1 billion, $1.1 billion, and most recent fund was $400 million. We do everything from super early stage. So you have a crazy idea and you say, I want to sort of incubate this inside of Lux, and maybe you can help introduce some technologists or some entrepreneurs that can partner with me, all the way to a corporate spin out. So we'll do everything from super seed stage, raw, unformed yet, all the way up to something that is fully formed but needs a new home, new capitalization. We're also, the partners are very different in the styles of investing they do. So I like to do very thesis-driven things, which means that I read voraciously, I try to understand what the consensus in a market is, and then I find the variant perception. Like, what's the thing that nobody else is really thinking about, and maybe for the wrong reason they're not focused on it or not focused on it. Other of our partners are very entrepreneur-driven, so they like backing the same people over and over again. And some people focus on these special situations where there may be a late-stage business that we can sort of recapitalize or spin out. So it really runs the gamut, and then we also look at all kinds of different sectors. So we might do things that, in robotics in particular, we've got a secretive robotic surgery company that's now raised hundreds of millions of dollars. We've got, space and drones and subwater and sea surface, and you never really know, where your next investment is going to come from. And I like to call this the 100-0-100 rule. So it's a little mix of ambition and arrogance, but and a little bit of humility. But we have 100% certainty that Lux is going to be investing in the most cutting-edge things over the next 1 or 2 years. But I have close to 0% certainty what those things are going to be. But then again, I have 100% certainty where they're going to come from, and it's usually at the edge of our already cutting-edge companies. So by being invested with a founder, with an entrepreneur who has basically invented the future, we go and ask them, what's the big hard problem that you're solving? And she or he will often say, well, we have a problem with this, and that's a clue to our next investment. And I can give you some great examples of that, but that's sort of how we think about early-stage investing all the way up through the late.
That's great, and I do think you've really earned a reputation as a firm that's investing in things that a lot of VCs are not quite prepared to invest in. And then we have Manish Kothari. Thank you so much for coming, the president of SRI Ventures. So Manish, I think what's interesting about you is you've previously, before becoming the director of robotics at SRI, had founded a SaaS company. So tell us a little bit about your path to your current role.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Yeah, so I started out actually in medical devices, used to do hips, knees, spines, did that for over a decade, moved into image processing, medical imaging, did that for a decade, started a couple of companies there. Finally, when the iPad came out, saw the opportunity and created what was then probably the first telemedicine company, leveraging just a platform where somebody did not need a router in their home. It was a very simple thesis. No router makes it easier for somebody who's 65 to do telemedicine. And it worked out really well. And sort of came to SRI to blend all of my background in medicine, software as a service type business models for the iPad, as well as my love of robotics. And this was around 7 years ago, came back to build the first, what I thought would be the first home health robotics company. And I was very, very before my time at that point. The technology was not ready. The concepts were not ready. At SRI, I run SRI Ventures, and there we make investments. So first of all, SRI does a lot of different things. It does everything from biotech to education to computer science. So the Siri for your iPhone came out of us, so my team. So we try and look at places where we can do arbitrage, really. We say, here's a great technology that's been developed in the computer science group, and wow, we can apply it for robotics in this particular way. And that background of not being scared of hardware, not being scared of software, not being scared of software as a service, enables us to find the right business model, because in robotics, some of the challenges are finding the right business model to get your technology out in the marketplace. And then we go ahead and make the first investment in. And with that first investment, we try and drive the market. I mean, the market's great right now. The technologies are amazing. The founders coming out are frankly extraordinary. So it's a really wonderful moment to be looking at robotics and investing in robotics right now.
When you say you are the first money in, what percentage of your deals are you incubating? I'd seen a deal, Abundant Robotics, an apple picking robot that just raised a $10 million Series A, I think, and it just sort of made me wonder.
Yeah, we're very proud of Abundant. So the way SRI works is we don't believe, I just simplified, we don't believe in pure tech transfer. Tech transfer for very complicated technologies usually fails. We believe in having people who have a deep understanding of the technology driving it. So in the case of Abundant Robotics, which is an apple-picking robot, you can go online and look at it. It was a concept that an engineer at SRI who had actually worked at Sandia before, who had done multiple DARPA programs as a lead, came in and said, I'm passionate about agriculture. I want to do apple-picking robots. I've tried 50 different ways, from multi-digit arms to different ways to do it. None of them actually protect the apple or protect the tree. He came up with a very, very novel, very different, off-kilter way of thinking about how am I going to pick the apple. And the moment I saw that, I was like, you've hit it. You've not followed the crowd. You've come up with your own idea. We put in the first $500,000. I brought in the CEO, and then the CEO and the entrepreneur themselves together formed a great company, Abundant Robotics, which we raised initial seed from a number of different investors. And then, as it was announced, Google, and Andy's in the audience here, I believe, today, as a partner at Google, came on board to fund the 10 million round. And it's very exciting.
Great. And Helen, thank you so much. Helen Zelman Boniski, who is the co-founder of Lemnos, which began as a hardware-focused venture firm, but I think you've expanded your mandate to also include software companies developing technologies for robotics companies, or hardware companies, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of robotics companies are primarily software companies and often are using off-the-shelf robotics components. So we're a little bit broader in how we see the world. We used to start by defining ourselves by what we didn't do in hardware, which was chips and biotech. Now we can talk, we've got 41 investments, and we can have examples of what we're doing in robotics and drones and aerospace and industrial IoT. But we're seeing a lot in robotics and automation now. I mean, what we're looking for primarily is founders. We invest at the earliest stages of a company. I mean, it's similar to these guys. I think everybody's, in the beginning. Sometimes, we might have an incomplete team and the company isn't even formed. So we're looking at people first, and then really any industry is fair game. We can't be experts on all of them. I think with our different partners, we have ideas around some, and we just want to get along with the founders early and get smart about these markets with them.
It does seem like you're investing a little bit more. Are you investing more aggressively in sort of robotics companies? I'd seen a couple of interesting deals you'd done. Simbi, which is a sort of a robotic
Retail.
For retail, right?
Yeah.
Plucking things off of shelves and.
So we've done robotics since, I think our first robotics investment was in 2012.
Okay.
When there was not a lot of venture dollars following it. And some of the stats that you brought up were interesting. And I think that's just the maturation of the industry and some of these companies that were originally formed in 2011, 2012, 2013, reaching Series B and C. So it's much larger rounds, and it's good to see the industry maturing.
Right, and hitting everyone's radar. Well, so I wanted to ask about that. What do you think, maybe Josh, I'll start with you. What do you think sort of prompted this kind of, interest in robotics? And do you think we've sort of reached some sort of a tipping point, or we're not quite there yet?
Well, I think most of these things generally begin with talent. So you have, I think, an outpouring of engineers that are coming out of amazing places, many of which have been trained by professors here who have started companies, people like Rod Brooks, and they in turn then go and start companies. And so I'd say that's the very first thing, is that you have an outpouring of talent that is not only sophisticated, but also very commercial. The second, I would say, is that increasingly these fields are blurring. So hardware, when it becomes a software problem, becomes a very scalable thing. The easiest way to think about this is, of course, like autonomous cars. If an autonomous car gets in an accident, you have a million other cars that can quickly learn. If a single person gets in an accident, that person dies. And when you take hardware and can turn it into code, it's something that scales. So that's the second thing. The third thing, I think, is just generally there's ebbs and flows in capital markets where people get excited about something, and anytime that the hype increases, the cost of capital gets low, and lots of money flows, and therefore lots of companies can get started. And I think that there's legitimate hard problems that these people are turning their turrets to and saying, wait a second, can I go and solve that? And that's the reason I'd say you see this sort of upsurge. You know, the other is that, you know, sort of what I was talking before, like one thing leads to the next. We had an interest in a crazy area of metamaterials, which are, you know, this area of physics. Well, you know, we started this company called Chimeta with Bill Gates. And I'm in a boardroom at Bill's office, and I hear about these guys that want to take these little thin satellite antennas and put them on satellites. And I said, well, how big are these satellites? They said, you know, about the size of a loaf of bread. And that becomes a company called, back then it was called Cosmogia, then Planet Labs, now called Planet. We've now got 200 robots, these little satellites, that are the largest constellation of Earth imaging satellites in history, started by 3 guys that basically came out of NASA, you know, that were launching rockets in the desert. And from that company, we get an insight like, okay, all the information that they're going to be collecting is going to be really valuable. And if you can parse that over time and run AI and machine learning on top of that, you know, that begets another company, and that becomes a company called Orbital Insight. And so one investment in one company leads you to these, you know, subsequent entrepreneurs. We funded some amazing and somewhat secretive self-driving car company in California called Zoox. And I'm in a room inside of their secretive facility, and there's all these people that are playing what would appear like video games. And at this point, we had put probably $22 million into the company. And I said, what the heck are these guys doing? You know, they're messing around on our time and on our money. And they said, you don't understand. Outside, the vehicles that you see, which don't even look like cars, are collecting information, you know, from LiDAR and optics and thermal and vibrational sensors at the rate of 1 second per second, what we call reality. But inside, they could do thousands of simulations a second on these GPUs. I said, well, who's making these GPUs? And I said, well, those 2 guys over there from NVIDIA, and these are chips that aren't even on the market yet. So then we get excited about this idea of GPUs, which is another important phenomenon that is fueling this. That chips that were originally used for gaming are now being used to do real-time environment simulation and help robots to navigate. So we then go and find the next cutting-edge GPU company and fund this company called Nirvana Systems. I'm out there publicly talking about how Intel is in a secular decline, and 8 months later, Intel buys these guys with barely a product in the market for $400 million, becomes the kernel of their AI. And so it's really hard to predict, you know, ex post facto, but a priori, all these things, you know, just sort of lead from one to the next. We've got the same coverage in the sky that's coming from Planet of the Earth, we're now doing on the sea surface. Mm-hmm. So a company like Sail Drone that is covering, they'll have 1,000 drones out in the next 2 years, covering every square inch of the ocean, something that was never possible before, using just robots out on the ocean. And this morning, we announced for one of our companies, Desktop Metal, which is a Boston entrepreneur, Rick Fulop, who's truly amazing, $115 million financing, the largest 3D printing financing in history. And it's just, you know, one thing just leads to the next, and it's super exciting.
Manish, I see you nodding your head a lot, so you must agree. And obviously the components have come down in price so significantly, and you can pack so much more onto a little...
Yeah, I think that the components have really come down. The GPUs are a big part of the game. Without the GPUs, I think a lot of this would not be possible, but you add the GPUs, you add the software side of it, the software is becoming easier. Similar things that happened in the internet marketplace or otherwise, where things that you normally, I remember writing matrix inversions when I was in PhD program, and now you just write A divided by B, and the system inverts itself. So that sort of stuff makes a big difference when you do things. I think in robotics and automation in general, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, if you will, that you can go after, and I think the companies are doing that successfully, are already maturing today. Mm-hmm. I think the shift that's happening now is to higher reliability, more precision type opportunities, and that's a great place to go. And the math is just starting to come out to enable that. The math that you need to be able to say, you know, if you think about AI, there's been a number of radiology-centric companies trying to do AI. Most of them have not done very well because they don't have the reliability and precision that you need to do this. Nobody wants you to miss even one tumor. Same is true for many robotic applications. You can't have things where the reliability and precision is good enough. 80% is not good enough. And so the math is now coming out on the software side about how to do that, how to deal with the corner cases. How do you take a new corner case and apply machine learning in a paucity of data to be able to start making judgment calls? And what are the tactics and techniques around that? So we're seeing a lot of progress going on in those areas. And in the next 2 to 3 to 5 years, as the academic groups bring out those sort of models, we're going to see a whole new wave of robotics companies coming out, handling techniques that they couldn't handle today. And that's what really makes me very jazzed and excited about being in this space, because I just see there's more and more and more that can be done.
You know, VCs have been sort of historically hesitant to invest in hardware, as all of you know, because of it's expensive. You're all very early stage investors. What are you seeing in terms of follow-on funding? Where is that coming from?
At the moment, you know, cash is abundant. So it is, you know, you've never heard a VC ever say it's not a great time to start a company, but it is a great time to start a company because the cost of capital is low. You know, there are new angels coming, there are new venture firms forming, there are corporate guys coming in. You know, SoftBank is making a huge impact on this stuff. And so there's abundant capital. And I think that the risk of raising money today is very low. The risk of doing a follow-on financing is very low. But that's just the capitalization of the business. Of course, whether or not you make a product that is a good business is a different story. But I think the follow-on funding environment today is very rich. Now, of course, you have to build a business and raise enough money so that when that changes, and it will, you know, you're in well stead.
Is it sort of, Helen, maybe you can answer this, is it sort of mostly VC firms or is it strategics? I feel like I see a lot of companies sort of entering into these later rounds. Yeah,
I think it's a lot of VC firms, especially in, you know, A's and B's. I think in some of the later stage rounds, we're seeing a lot more strategics. It's been a good time, I think, generally for robotics and hardware companies, and as long as that continues is great. If not, like Josh said, it's focus on, you know, building your business and getting the profitability and making sure that your unit economics of the robot work.
I do think one needs to be creative about the business models here because, you know, the good news with the changes in the world is people are now thinking about robot as a service models and other things versus purely a CapEx play. CapEx plays were tough, and one of the points I make to our companies is if you're going to do a service model, you better find a way in 6 to 9 months to recover your cost of goods at least, because if you can't do that, then you don't have a service model. But if you have that, then there's opportunity. So again, the reducing cost of the componentry is an important, really important factor in the success in the robotics companies, because otherwise, if it's a $750,000 piece of equipment you have to buy, you're falling. It's a complex game. Yes, you can do it if you add tremendous value, but it's not as simple as if you say, here's your monthly fee, and I can show you the ROI, and over 6 months I'm going to break even, and over 9 months I'm going to start making a profit. So I think if you have the proper mechanics, the fundraising right now, as Josh said, there's no shortage of capital to be had. You just have to make the right case.
I don't want to trivialize the pragmatic and the practical, and at the risk of sounding maybe a little bit cheesy and a little bit romantic, the advice that I would give, particularly if you're a founder and you're starting a company, or you're running one now and you're thinking about raising money, yes, margins matter, yes, a business matters, but in the early stage, what I would recommend, 2 words, make magic.
Yeah.
I mean, we all know the quote that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, but I can tell you, sitting on the other side of the table, and when an entrepreneur comes into us, and we feel like magic has just been made, that we've just seen something that nobody else has seen, that we've just seen something that came out of a sci-fi movie, that we feel like we're sitting across from some scientist who's like some rebel that's trying to shape the world in their view, that's the thing that gets us to part with our cash. So make magic.
Yeah.
Simple enough. So, you know, I was going to ask if you have to talk to your LPs differently, but it sounds like you might not have to. I was wondering, you know, if they're expecting you have a longer timeline, but I guess between these sort of software as a service businesses like Orbital Insight you mentioned and the cost of things coming down, the expectation is pretty much the same, like a 10-year horizon.
Yes, certainly our funds are 10 years. Now, you know, there's 3 edges you can have in investing, and I think smart LPs figure this out. You can have an informational edge, an analytical edge, or a behavioral edge. Information, we all get the same information. It's really hard to have better information. Analytical, we get the same information, but we analyze it differently, put different order of magnitude of probabilities on what we think is going to happen. But the real edge is behavioral. And if you ask most people, you know, if the market is discounting back 1 or 2 years, if you're able to think out 3 or 4 or 5 years, you have an edge. And certainly in venture, we, you know, sort of tie ourselves like the mast to the mast like Odysseus against the siren song. The siren song is short-term returns. When people want short-term returns, that's why you see app businesses get funded in short-term flip software stuff and our advertising and marketing stuff, and we don't do that kind of stuff because we're looking out 5, 7, 10 years, and we don't know what that future is going to portend, so we have to have the patience for it. But I think that having a differing time horizon, this idea of time arbitrage, is a really valuable thing. And when everybody's focused on the short term, you get really competitive environment. And everybody agrees, you know, ad tech is the hot thing, or software, or apps, or whatever. You pay a high price for a cheery consensus. And if you're looking further out, there's fewer people, there's less competition, you can seem smarter just because there's less people there.
We've been talking about all the deals happening. It does seem like there's some areas that, I don't know, could be argued that they're overfunded. Of course, you know, conversely, you could say we're at the first inning of this. What do you guys think of the different sectors? Like Helen, maybe tell me about industrial robots. Is that something that there's so many different, hospitality, manufacturing. How do you look at that sort of sector? And is that something that you're very focused in, or you sort of feel like?
Yeah, again, it comes back to the founders. And I think an ideal robotics founding team probably has 3 people, and there's some overlap, but you've got the CEO who's going to be the visionary and kind of drive the strategy of the overall company. They're going to be doing the fundraising and recruiting. Then you've got the technologist who's going to go build out the engineering team and ideally has a lot of robotics experience. And I think the third piece, which is missing for a lot of teams, especially coming out of right out of university or research environments, is that customer voice. And there's dozens of industries, and I think being able to communicate the exact value proposition for the customer for any industry, I think it's just about speaking the language of the customer.
In terms of sectors, I mean, I like to ask a very sophisticated, PhD level question to figure out our sectors. It's 2 words: what sucks? And if you can figure out what sucks, that's a problem to solve. And that could be, whether you're trying to map and analyze the entire surface of the ocean, or take pictures of the Earth every day, or do robotic surgery at very fine, discrete levels and be able to map the human body from inside, whether that's drones and how to figure out how you solve the battery problem. We never thought that putting a tether on a drone, which was the basis for us funding Helen Grenier in sci-fi, would lead to this great company putting a drone on a string, more or less. So I think if you find entrepreneurs who themselves have found something that sucks, you can look today, we were just talking earlier with Rod Brooks, elder care. This is going to be a big market. The idea of a booming boomer population that needs assistive care. And we've seen a lot of these things, both probably technologies that start in the industrial warehouse, end up getting applied in the home in some ways. So turn your turrets to what sucks.
Yeah, and I would say the industrial space, you also have to see that the larger companies are not sitting by and waiting to, as technology evolves, they too start getting into the marketplace. And some of the immediate incremental innovations are going to be done quite successfully by companies that already exist. And I agree. We look at things and we try and say, where's there something where there's just things aren't working, which is what sucks. And then we really ask ourselves the second question, and we ask all our founders to ask the question, why do you believe you have an unfair technical advantage? Because give us that answer, and if you can give that answer in a few sentences or a formula or a drawing, then that's all it takes. I mean, the moment you have that was the case in Abundant. I mean, he came up with a different end effector. It was pretty straightforward. And the moment we looked at the end effector and we said, that's completely different than everybody else who's tried to do it, that's it. And you have an unfair advantage because you're not going to hurt the tree and you're not going to hurt the apple. That's it.
I will say, when you're scouting these things out, also do not pay attention, or don't put a lot of weight on the attention, on market-sized research reports about how big this market is going to be in 2020 or 2025. We don't pay any attention to it. And for the most part, the analysts that are doing it, if they really knew that, they would be starting the company. If you take a local company like Kiva, which I think has begot a lot of interest in warehouse robotics and a lot of great teams that are spawning off and starting new companies, there's no way that the market research reports, 10, 12 years ago, we're talking about warehouse robotics being this big thing. It was the insight and genius of Jeff Bezos to be able to identify how he could use that as a competitive advantage and own it exclusively that begot that. The only thing that is predictive of great returns for businesses is not how big that market size is going to be as predicted by a researcher, but how much capital is in the sector. If there's a ton of money in the sector, returns are going to be low. If there's scarce amount of capital in the sector and the people are scarce, they're going to be very highly valued. So try to do something that other people are not doing, are not focused on, other investors are not pouring cash into.
One last quick question. I guess it's sort of top of mind because I've been doing patent stories recently, but that's something that obviously the founders in the audience have to be thinking about too. I think there's something like 120,000 patents have been awarded over the last 20 years. How do you think of those when you're looking at a deal? How important is it? And is it sort of, do you think of them maybe in the same way that you would a software company, or is there sort of like a different kind of calculation?
Yeah, so I mean, for SRI, we do a lot of patents every year, and for us, patents are very, very important. I think different sectors have different weightings and different importances, but if you get a great patent on a great idea, we think it deserves the time and effort and strategy. I come from the medtech space where patents are critically important, so I tend to use the same patenting strategy because I found it supports our cases very well. I'm not sure all investors view patents as equally important or less important. And maybe both Helen and Josh can answer that, but I view them very importantly. We go very aggressively, and as far as we've seen, they've turned out to be very valuable for us.
I love in a founder when they are psychotically competitive. I mean, everybody at Lux has a different lens that they evaluate founders. I love when somebody is psychotically competitive. They have to be ethical, but they have to be psychotically competitive. They don't want to just play to play, they want to play to win. And one of my founders, Boston-based guy, started a significant robotics company. I asked him, are you thinking of patenting this? And he laughed at me. He said, patent this? He's like, I've got 8 different attorneys. We've got hundreds of filings, 12 already issued. It's an intense kind of thing. And so I think the value of a patent is the negative right that you can impose on other people to say you can't do what we're doing. You can't practice in the area. Composition of matter, field of use. The ability to thwart somebody else is the real value of the patent.
Guys, we are out of time, and it's too bad because I have a million other things I'd love to talk to you about. But thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Connie.
Thanks, Connie.